Bali. It evokes so many emotions: beauty, slowness, peace. But I guess in recent times, also images of over tourism. I found both to be true. I first came to Bali around 2016, and I remember while swimming in the waterfalls, riding my bike around the paddies, watching the most magical sunsets every day. So, when a family trip and a work assignment came up to Bali, I wanted to see if I could recreate that feeling of slowness. I wanted to know, how much has tourism changed Bali? How do locals feel about it? Can you still find quieter pockets on the island? Can the old Bali, the one I knew and loved, still be found? Is it still possible to slow travel in Bali?
Ladies and gentlemen, we're going to be starting our descent shortly.
When I landed in Denpasar on an early morning, I think the first thing that hit me was this idea that this feels less like an island and more like a city. When I last stayed at the center of the island, I drove my bike along the rice paddies, ate at local warungs and quaint cafes, and had this, small village feeling as I chatted with friendly locals. But this time, the roads were chock a block with traffic. The rice paddies had been swallowed up by hotels, restaurants, B&Bs, guest houses, cafes, yoga studios, shops, you name it. And I even got cheated by a money changer who pretended to be friendly but ended up inserting one of those low denomination notes in my stack of notes. It was my parents' first time on the island, so we visited some popular temples and beaches. But because of the traffic, even short distances took us so long to reach. Despite being crowded, these ancient Balinese temples still have this aura of calmness. And in the stunning rice terraces, I learned that they are no longer just for agriculture, but they also benefit the villages around through organized tourism. I also got a behind the scenes peek at those famous influencer shots of people swinging among the paddies wearing these beautiful dresses. And now, when you see those shots on Instagram, you know the actual reality behind them.
Okay, just follow me and make snake.
When I got chatting with locals who have grown up in
Like
Ubud,
this, like this.
I had to ask them, what do you feel about this explosion of tourism?
As you know, working in the ISO is very hard.
Newman, in
Yeah,
his early
more
30s,
energy.
told me that if it wasn't for tourism, he and his friends would have had to become rice farmers. And that's hard, back-breaking work no one wants to do. But he misses the days when Ubud was more nature than concrete. The joy of living here is a little less, he said. I feel like I'm always sitting in traffic. I remember sitting at a stunning plant based cafe in Ubud that day and had this heavy feeling come over me. Bali seemed to have become a victim of its own soulful beauty, and tourism here was destroying the very thing it was built on. Isn't that ironic? Thus began my quest for quieter pockets of Bali, where I could experience the island like it once was, where visitors were received with warmth and curiosity and not seen merely as walking wallets. Together with my partner, I went further and further, and sure enough, the landscape gradually changed from concrete to nature. Rice terraces covered the land, forested patches were everywhere, maize and water spinach fields swayed in the breeze. Some tourism, but it didn't feel like too much. Some warungs and cafes, but they didn't feel like too much. Some movement on the roads, but it didn't feel like too much. Some guest houses and B&Bs, but they didn't feel like too much. In just a few days, I felt my rhythm slowing down and falling in pace with that of the village we decided to stay in. Some mornings I woke up to soulful praying, some mornings I woke up to birdsong. I drove my bike along the paddies and fields, went on long walks, swam off nearly empty beaches, spent time with newfound friends in their traditional homes, savored Balinese dishes made with banana blossom and black rice, and learned to cook them in a Balinese kitchen. And I watched the most moving sunsets of my life. In these parts of the island, conversations flowed like the ebb and flow of tides on the Indian Ocean. And from newfound local friends, I learned many things about life in Bali. For instance, did you know that people in Bali don't have surnames or family names? Kids are named based on the family's caste and the order in which they are born. When you meet someone named Ryan, he or she is the firstborn, and Kadek, the secondborn. Bali is the only island in Indonesia that is majority Hindu, about 86%, and one of the reasons it has been able to hold on to this identity is the Banjar. The Banjar is like a village council in every village, and among other things, it oversees wedding ceremonies and temple festivals. And the Banjar ensures that Balinese traditions are still followed. I heard that Balinese people contribute about 20% of their income to the Banjar. My friend Kadek jokingly told me that there are too many ceremonies in Bali. Someone dies, ceremony. Someone born, ceremony. Someone marries, ceremony. Every festival, ceremony. Every week, ceremony. But on a more serious note, I learned that life can be very demanding for Balinese women. Every Balinese home has a temple to worship their ancestors, and every temple has many gods. The woman of the family, usually the wife, must cook and feed the gods every day, and prepare offerings and gifts for the home and village temples. That can be a lot of work, in addition to other household work, raising the children, and going out to earn an income. I'm not sure how time passed by living in that little Balinese village. I suppose we just became part of the fabric of that area for a while. I found my perfect neighborhood cafe to write and work from. Not far from us was a pickleball court, so we learned the sport and made Balinese friends in the process. Sometimes we went in search of hidden waterfalls. Some turned out to be selfie spots, but at others we could swim like wild children of the planet. I learned some Balinese words and tried to chat with local farmers, and little by little learned about the Subak system in Bali. This is a community-based system of managing water for the rice paddies. They say this system was developed around the 9th century and is based on the Tri Hita Karana philosophy, which suggests harmony among humans, nature, and the divine. The volcanic landscape of Bali created fertile soil, but the island is also densely populated, so a lot of rice had to be grown. So the Subak system focused on forests to protect the water supply. The landscape was terraced so water could flow downhill. A system of canals and tunnels was created to supply water across the island, and the famous water temples acted as watersheds. But as in Ubud, many of the younger people I met around Bali don't aspire to become rice farmers. They would rather work in tourism or hospitality, work at a hotel or run a cafe or drive a cab.
They work.
And as outsiders, we can be quick to judge that. But how many of us want to do backbreaking work in the fields? Even in the remote pockets of Bali, I could see the changes coming. A couple of new cafes opened just in the month we were around. Construction for new restaurants and B&Bs is underway. In these agricultural areas, tourism can be a source of economic prosperity, but I couldn't help wondering, will these paddies and forests be replaced by concrete one day too? Will over-tourism find its way here too? Will the local culture here be eroded too? I posed some of these questions to Adi, a guide who grew up in one of these quaint villages. He said, we like tourism, we need tourism, but we don't want people to come to Bali, buy our land, and start doing tourism on it. The industry term for what he described is tourism leakage, meaning money that is spent by tourists leaves the local economy. It doesn't circulate among the local people or benefit the place where it is spent. This often happens when tourism businesses are foreign owned and don't contribute enough locally. It's a big problem in the global south since people with richer currencies often buy land and start businesses in less expensive places, like Bali. I have to be honest, I don't have all the answers. But I have to tell you this. Slow travel is one way to confront these questions, to go beyond the glossy image of a tourist destination and start seeing it as someone's home instead. To sit with the uncomfortable realities of capitalism and evaluate our own place in it. As for Bali, its soul filled mind with beauty and slowness, and compelled me to think deeper about how and why we travel.